Hello, Baltimore. Hello, Facebook. I am Council President. Sometimes I keep going back and reverting back to old titles, but I am Council President Nick J. Mosby, and we're here live with some amazing guests. The point of today's discussion is going to center around our mental health. We know that we're in the midst of a global pandemic. We don't have to turn on CNN, turn on our local news, even read our paper. We just have to open our front doors and we can immediately see the effects that the pandemic is having on our communities, whether it's seniors who've been shuttered in and isolated and secluded away from precious loved ones, or children who are trying to navigate the system of virtual schooling and missing that social emotional concept and connectivity to their classmates and teachers, or their parents who are dealing with an anemic mass transit system as essential workers, worried about their children at home, worried about their parents secluded away, but just trying to do any and everything to stay away from the coronavirus. We know that all that plays into mental health and where we are right now as a community. And unfortunately, we're seeing that in really, really scary numbers. There was a report that was recently done by Johns Hopkins Dr. Nestat, that basically said during the peak of the 2020 coronavirus scare, that there was a twofold increase of suicides, completed suicides in the African American community. And unfortunately, we all saw the horrific story of the mother, the 34-year-old mother who was attempting to drown her 6-year-old daughter in the Baltimore harbor. And thankfully, there were some Baltimore police officers that took brave action, jumped in the frigid water of the Baltimore harbor and saved both the child and the mother. This breakdown, unfortunately, is ever more clear right now. And the point of today's discussion is to provide information to us all, whether it's information that we can use for our own selves, for our loved ones, for our neighbors. But the more we're informed, the better we can kind of deal from a preventative care aspect of it. So today we're joined by an esteemed panel. We have Mr. Edgar Wiggins, the Executive Director of Baltimore Crisis Response. So please give a huge Facebook round of applause for Mr. Wiggins. We also have the Reverend Pam Yerby-Hammack. She's the Executive Pastor of City of Abraham Church and Ministries, and founder of the Wind of Change Ministries. So please give a huge Facebook round of applause for Madam Executive Pastor. And then lastly, we're going to be joined, hopefully, if we can work out the technical issues with Miss Tevis S. Simon of Station North, a peer-to-peer mentor at the state chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness and owner of Walk by Faith, a consulting business that provides mental health and substance abuse services for Baltimoreans. So we're going to jump right into the discussion. We're excited tonight. Thank you for joining us on our first illustration of this. And again, mental health is an important topic, and that's why we chose it. So I'm going to jump to you, Mr. Wiggins, real quick. If you could quickly just kind of talk to us about Baltimore Crisis Response and how the Here to Help hotline works. And the services that are provided through the hotline.
I'm happy to do that. Baltimore Crisis Response, Inc., affectionately known as BCRI, is the city's first and only comprehensive behavioral health crisis service. And so we provide a full range and when we say behavioral health, we're not just talking about mental health, we're also talking about addictions and substance abuse treatment. So first and foremost is our 24-hour hotline where people come and call to connect with us. That is the first point of contact. Everything starts with a phone call. So call comes in, what the caller can expect to get is a compassionate listener who will work with them and try to determine the best way to meet that person's needs. It's a collaboration. It's not a counselor that's telling you this is what you need. It's a counselor who's listening to you and saying, okay, based on what you've said, perhaps this will work. But in addition to that telephone service, which is the gateway into our other services, we also have mobile crisis teams that go out and visit people in their homes, community locations. We also have residential services where people can come and stay with us for short periods of time, get support, get counseling, and get medication. So when we say it's a full range of behavioral health services, it starts with that telephone call, but then works its way through to face-to-face supportive contact.
So Mr. Wiggins, kind of walk us through like a call. When you say like someone will be on the other end, be it for like myself or a family member or a friend, like what should we expect to receive at that particular point of the call?
The caller should receive first and foremost the compassionate listener. I can't tell you how important that is, because that hotline counselor's job is to make a connection with that person, to walk through with them. First of all, what's the problem? That counselor has to assess the problem, the person's needs, the severity of the problem. You know, some people just need support. Some people just need to know where to go to get services. Some people just need somebody to lean on for that period of time. But others can be in much more acute and severe crisis situations. A significant percentage of the calls that come in involve someone who's having thoughts about death and dying and suicide. So those are calls that are important for us to assess and then say, okay, what kind of help do you need? What kind of help can we give you? And what are the options that are open to you? So that's what people should expect: compassion and a good, accurate assessment. And then, frankly, where do we go from here? Some folks, it's one and done. Others, we may need to follow with regular calls. Others, we may need to send a mobile crisis team out to deal with them in person. So, you know, there are lots of options, but people can expect a professional response to try and meet their emotional needs.
So because we're in the midst of the pandemic, and again, we talked about food insecurity, we talked about housing insecurity, we talked about all of the things that we know unfortunately lead to unproductive and hurtful behavior potentially if folks that are in these vulnerable positions do not necessarily seek the right help. Have you seen a significant change in the amount of calls or the types of calls, you know, during this period, say since the past March?
Oh, absolutely. There's been a significant increase in calls that have come in to the Here to Help hotline. You know, one of the things, and your description was right on. When you look at the pandemic and how it has affected the community, it can have a more impactful effect on the African-American community when you start to think about vulnerability. You know, there are a lot of people that were vulnerable before the pandemic, and then you add that on top. So yeah, many people are desperate in ways that they haven't been before. So your description of not only isolated seniors, but isolated people. If you think about the past holiday system, I'm from Philly, and I always go home during the holidays to visit my mother and my sisters and my family there. Couldn't do that this year.
Yeah.
That was tough.
Yeah.
And my mother is a little bit older, so, you know, she doesn't Zoom. So
correct.
A lot of phone calling. So all of those kinds of things are different. If you think about people that are involved with support groups and 12-step groups and all of those kinds of things where that personal contact is so important, you can't do that now.
Yeah.
You have to Zoom. And it's better than nothing, but there's nothing like when you're in distress, somebody putting their hand on your shoulder and saying, hey, I'm with you. It's going to be all right. Now we have to do that virtually.
Yeah.
So
Or staring at you face to face, that interpersonal
right.
activity and working is, I mean, that works for whether it's a job interview, whether it's, talking to an employee or talking to you, whatever. I mean, it's that face to face is always will trump,
That's the personal touch. And
yeah.
it's hard to get the personal touch virtually. It's the best we can do with what we have, but it's a whole lot more difficult.
Well, Mr. Wiggins, you are extremely passionate about this. Baltimore City is truly blessed and thankful to have your knowledge and your service. What drew you to this line of work? Because I know, again, you're considered a subject matter expert when we talk about this from a response perspective. What drew your interest and your passion of doing this work?
Well, it's very interesting because I kind of fell into it. I wound up I have been in community mental health since the late 60s. I really worked my way through undergraduate school and graduate school because I left home when I was 19. So I was on my own. The work really fascinated me. And I was very fortunate at that time to have mentors. So I was running treatment programs in Philadelphia in 1975. Now, I've been in Baltimore now for 32 years. It's home for me. Both my children were born here. But when I look at the work that I do and the people that I've had the privilege to work with, I can't imagine doing anything else because actually I've done this all my life.
So with all that experience, what are the myths that are out there about mental illness that we need to dispel?
There are a ton of them. First of all, a number of people believe that mental illness is not a real illness. Yeah. I've heard people describe people with mental illnesses as weak. I've heard things like the medications don't work. What good is it going to do for me to talk with somebody? This idea that people with mental illnesses are crazy and dangerous, none of those things are true. But those are the myths that we have. And also this idea, and especially in the African-American community, I think there's this idea that we need to solve our own problems. I mean, if you look at our history, we have a history of self-reliance, reliance on the community, reliance on the church and the faith community. So there's this idea that, you really don't need that. You just need to pray, and prayer changes things. And believe me, my mother is a minister, so I know prayer changes things. Mm-hmm. But there are also other tools that are available, like therapy, like counseling, like medication, like treatment. There are things that can support people, but we've got to get past these myths that mental illness is not a real illness. And finally, one of the other things that we know and we've learned from science is there are chemical changes in the brain, there are changes in the body. These are things that we can treat, and our treatments get better every year. When I think about the late 60s, when I started, the medications weren't as good as they are now. I mean, we've come a long way, and it's important for people in the community to know that we have tools that are effective.
So, Mr. Wiggins, there is somebody either watching us live right now or will view this in the future that might be struggling with some early onset issues around mental health. What would you tell them about understanding and knowing the initial warning signs, and then what they should do to try to immediately, from a preventative and proactive perspective, address them?
Well, there are two things that I can say, or there are two areas that really impact us. One is emotional, and that really has to do with changes like sadness, being tearful, anxiety, withdrawing from others, obsessive thoughts, unhealthy preoccupations, changes in our self-esteem. I used to think I'm a pretty good person, and now I don't feel so good when I look in the mirror. Feeling guilty for no apparent reason. But then there are also physiological changes that we see, changes in appetite, eating too much or not at all or very little, trouble falling asleep or early awakening, low energy level, or sudden increases in energy. Certainly changes in the use of substances. That these are all signs that things aren't working well. And what we want to do is catch them early so it doesn't become a crisis. You know, often when people call our line, it's like, well, how long have you been feeling this way? I've been feeling this way for 6 months or 7 months. Well, why didn't you reach out? I didn't know there was any help available. I thought I would get over it. I mean, all of the things that we tell ourselves. And so it's really important to catch those warning signs early and reach out and seek help.
Wow, that's beautiful. No, thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Brittany. She's going to monitor the comments and kind of keep the discussion moving along. So, Brittany, is there anything out there that you're hearing or you're seeing that you want to add to the discussion?
Yeah, I just want to thank Mr. Wiggins for joining us tonight. You know, I worked a crisis hotline and understand the importance and what a valuable resource that is for our communities. And something you mentioned, Mr. Wiggins, that I think is so important is that you do not have to wait until, you know, it is so unbearable that you feel as though you can't go on. A lot of times, you know, I know that you probably experience this with the hotline too, is that sometimes folks may be feeling anxious and they need to talk to someone. They may have had something just happen in their day and they don't have someone to talk to, and they need to, you know, have a trained hotline specialist. And I think that's also really important to bring up, is that your hotline specialists are folks who go through extensive training.
Absolutely.
And are dedicated people that want to help, you know, our residents of Baltimore, and that they are there to help. So I just thank you so much, you know, for joining us tonight. We do have a question from our audience, and I think it's a really great one. And I believe that Mr. Wiggins, you may be able to answer this. So we have a question that asks, that mentions Maryland has a great partnership with the National Council on Mental Health. Does the Baltimore Police Department have a training program for officers to be trained in mental health first aid or to de-escalate situations?
Great question. One of the things that we have been involved with since 2004 is training Baltimore City police officers in terms of being more effective dealing with people in crisis. They are taught de-escalation techniques. They are taught how to recognize the signs and symptoms. We have a whole discussion of myths because, of course, police are very concerned about safety. And sometimes, you know, they go in guns blazing rather than with that compassionate listening spirit. So those are all things that we train the police officers in the city to do. And as you know, we're under a federal consent decree, so we've actually had to go back and revise a lot of our training so it is in keeping with the national standards. But I will tell you in a minute that one of the most gratifying things that I have done in my career is training police officers.
Wow.
I've had police call me and say, you know what you trained me in? I did it and it worked. And I'm like, no kidding. So, you know, it's very important because we know they have a tough job. They have a stressful job. And one of the things that we train them in is if they can connect with people, de-escalate people, be compassionate with people, that's the best way that you're going to get cooperation from that person.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was telling my staff earlier, 3 days ago, I was in a supermarket and a man was clearly having a mental illness episode, a breakdown. He took his keys, his bag, his coat off. He was throwing it, slammed it on the floor. And he immediately went into that folks around the corner at the supermarket did not like his haircut. This was what he was kind of caught up on.
Okay.
And one of the store, stocking gentlemen, the ones that kind of stocked the shelves, he stopped and he started to engage with the gentleman. And he said, I think your hair looks perfect. Like, are you, what's going on? And he said, these guys around the corner, they're making fun of my hair. He's like, man, don't go around that corner. Those guys, they make fun of me too. Just kind of leave it. And the guy just felt this connection with him. Exactly. And his whole demeanor just kind of came within. He connected with them. They started talking. And I thought, like, clearly this young guy who is stocking shelves at this supermarket probably didn't have maybe specific training. But imagine if this was just kind of an ongoing thing, the same way that people learn CPR, but just really understanding and learning about the breakdown in the issues around mental illness. We're going to turn it over to the executive pastor, Yerby-Hammack, right now. Miss Reverend Yerby-Hammack, tell us about the work that you do around mental health advocacy and kind of how you're part of this discussion today.
Okay, absolutely. I'll be happy to. Well, I have found that one thing that I believe is very important is that we do just what we're doing now. We have conversation. Yeah. We don't shy away from talking about mental illness. We talk about it, and we talk about it from what it really is, from a personal perspective, from an educational perspective. And so what I've done is I've tried to get into some churches to share with them how mental health is important to us in the faith-based community. I've been a preacher ever since 1995, and I've been in many churches in the city. But when I decided that it was time to start talking about mental health, I reached out to some of those churches that were already familiar with me and that I was familiar with. And I was able to get in those churches and talk to the congregants about this issue of mental health. I wasn't coming to preach for Women's Day now. I was now coming to bring some information that I felt everybody really needed to have. I've also done some things like this, been part of panel discussions, again, so that we can just talk about the issue and get it out in the open. I really believe that getting these issues out in the open is probably one of the best ways to fight the stigma so that we can all connect with one another. I have been part of women's retreats, leaders retreats, and they have invited me specifically to talk about mental illness. Very on when I first started, probably in about maybe 2013, I developed a seminar. I put together a seminar to bring together the church and mental health professionals, and then invited faith leaders to attend that. So those things have been very, very helpful. And one of the other things was that I eventually wrote a book that was published in 2018 that told my story.
Where's the cover at? We need to see the book behind you.
Oh, you know what? And I meant to bring the book up, but I forgot.
Got it. What's the name of the book?
It's Fly with One Wing, God's Grace in Our Times of Adversity.
All right, well, next time we have you on, we got to figure out a nice way to prop up that book behind you.
Absolutely.
Tell folks
I'm terrible with PR.
So, Reverend, real quick, the intersectionality between, say, the church, right, and mental illness. Now, I'm going to throw this out there. You're a reverend, so you can smack my hand if I'm taking this the wrong way. But growing up, I grew up in Northeast Baltimore. I tell folks all the time, 3-bedroom house with 6 women, right? My grandmother, my mother, aunts, cousin, sister, right? And my mother and grandmother were faithful in the church, right? But they also had a tremendous amount of stress on them as it relates to the bills, as it relates to my mother catching 2 buses to and from work every single day, as it relates to worrying about me and school, all the things that kind of come into play in our normal lives that unfortunately we've normalized when we brought up in these circumstances and kind of live in these circumstances. And there was always this idea of, praying and their faith and believing through the process of church. But I think that's one thing that has always been consistently missing from that equation is actually, having mental health checks and keeping up with your mental health. So I think that there is some sort of intersectionality that we have to continue to make normal in our communities. And I think some of the work that you're doing is kind of doing that. How would you like to expand or kind of talk about those things?
Absolutely. I totally agree. I had to have my mind renewed. And I'll tell you what really changed my mind about mental health and faith. And it was when I had my own personal mental health crisis. I was taught to believe too that you can just pray it away. I was also taught to believe that if anyone had a mental illness, that their faith was probably weak. Some people have even said that it's been demons, but I knew myself that I didn't have any of those things. I didn't have demons. I am a woman of faith. I have been, brought up in church, almost probably born on the pew. And so all of those things. But when I had my own crisis, I understood that even though I kept praying, that things were not happening. They were not going away. Scripture that's very important to me as a preacher, especially, but to the scriptures that I stood on would not always give me the comfort. So I had to have my mind renewed, and I had to begin to think about mental health in a different way. Mental health is like any other sickness or disease. If you have diabetes, if you have heart trouble, if you're having a heart attack, you don't want a bunch of people just standing over you praying. You want somebody to call 911 and call an ambulance. So, we have to, one thing that God has given us, he's given us wisdom. Yeah. And we can put wisdom, and he's also given us common sense. So I had to renew my mind and understand that I'm still a woman of faith. Yes. I still pray. I still stand very firm on the scriptures. They help me to get through each of the day. I tell people my medications, I pray over my meds, and I take it. Wow. And I'm still trusting God in all of this to help get me through. When I have to go to the therapist, I was taught to say, Jesus, go to the therapist with me, and my faith and standing on God's word I believe it has given me the strength and the courage to go where people said that I couldn't go.
Yeah, Jesus, look over my clinician, look over my therapist.
Absolutely.
To help and God in the right direction through the knowledge.
And I realized, I believe that God has given wisdom and knowledge to the doctors. Yeah. I didn't have a desire to go to school to be a doctor, but someone has. Even with the medication, I believe that wisdom and knowledge has come from God. And so I trust God that he is leading me to the right place. I trusted God, and he led me to get the mental health help that I needed.
Amen. So Reverend, when we're talking to, because we're on Facebook and we're in Baltimore, so the people that either they are live right now or will listen later, there's going to be some devout, faithful Christians that are directly tied into their churches. Yes. And a lot of times when I travel around to different churches, we hear about ministries to help with financial fitness. We hear about ministries to deal with prostate cancer or diabetes awareness and all these other things. You rarely hear ministries around like mental illness and how this church can kind of, be that conduit to helping getting that support. For someone that's listening today or will listen in the future, what advice do you have to them in talking to the leadership of their church of trying to incorporate some of the practices that you've been able to help people throughout the city incorporate them in their own institutions?
Okay. I would just say to, ask the pastor, try to get on his calendar to have a few moments to talk to him about this issue. If you don't already have a mental health ministry in your church, that may be something that you want to talk about, the possibility of having a mental health ministry in that church. For clergy, not just clergy, but lay persons alike, I think that getting an education as much as you can. I'm not saying that you have to go to school to get a degree in it, but there are so many places like Mr. Wiggins, he could come into the church and have a conversation about what this all looks like. You can invite people who have their own personal stories. One thing that I noticed once I started talking about my mental health crisis, I didn't know that there were so many people in the church who were dealing with what I was dealing with, but nobody.
We're taught to turn to the church. That's what we're taught.
Right.
You have this issue, you need to pray.
Yes, you come to the church. And so you can't ignore it. The pastor should not ignore it. While they're planning their calendars for the year, while you're planning your services for Easter and Christmas, hey, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Stick something in there. We do it for Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
Yeah.
February's Red Dress Sunday. It's not hard to do. We just have to remember that mental health is an issue. And everyone, all of us should be dealing with our mental health. Everyone won't have a mental illness, but we all have to take care of our mental health.
Wow. Just like we have to take care of our personal health, our bodies.
Absolutely.
Eating right, we should be working out. We have to provide that same level of maintenance to our mental health.
Absolutely.
So if when you run into contact with somebody, you're at church A and you can tell that they're potentially having a problem, or they know about the work that you're doing in the ministry that you're in, what type of places do you direct them to? Or what type of services do you direct them to? So just speaking to folks out there, other services or hotlines or things that we can direct folks to, where would you direct someone?
Okay, I would say, first of all, if anyone thinks that they may need a mental health professional and they don't know where to go, you can always start with your primary care doctor. If you have a primary care doctor, you can also reach out to some of the mental health websites. Psychology Today is a website that will help you find a therapist. And also, one thing I think is very important that we in the church should do for our parishioners is to provide support. One problem I had when I first found out I needed to find a therapist, I was told to go to the World Wide Web. And that was not a good idea. I was already unfocused, didn't have any help, but I had my daughter who helped walk me through it. And so that's another thing that churches can do. Start to get together a resource directory so that as some of your members come, you will have some numbers. You will have Baltimore Crisis. You will have the National Alliance of Mental Illness. We have the Baltimore chapter. We have a Maryland chapter. There's Mental Health America. And and I would just encourage people to just be an advocate and to pay attention to people. In church, we come in the door, praise the Lord, hallelujah. But are you really paying attention to me? Don't just come in, sit on the pew, and then just leave out. There's really something to be said to just get to know the people that you are around. Yes. And so if you notice that I'm not the same chipper person that I usually am, yes, and we have a relationship, then you can engage in you can ask me, well, Pam, how are you doing today?
Or Reverend, also, if you know that like I'm experiencing something like the loss of a loved one.
Absolutely.
That is a lot of times they're triggers to bring up things around our mental health. So, just look out for me, protect me, and talk to me.
Yes.
What I tell people is that when those things happen, you should just sit down with a therapist anyway. You might feel perfect. Everything might be in order. You might be good. But just like you would go get an annual checkup, just sit down with the therapist and kind of talk those things through. So thank you so much, Reverend. Right now, we're going to head back to you, but we're going to turn to Brittany to see if she has anybody to shout out online or any interesting questions that are out there.
Yeah, so thank you. We actually had two really good statements actually come in, and I want to read them because I think they're important. So the first one was from Camilla, and she mentioned that, you know, we also need to normalize the importance of social workers and mental health professionals seeking guidance for their own mental health wellness, especially with the moral distress felt related to COVID-related illness and death.
Yes.
And I think that is so important. You know, social workers, doctors, police officers, other mental health providers, you know, we're hearing these stories every day. And, you know, secondary trauma is real. You know, just for definition for secondary trauma, it's defined as indirect exposure to trauma through a firsthand account or a narrative of a traumatic event. And also, you know, a lot of folks that go into the helping profession, we often don't take time for ourselves and our own mental health. And if we are not, you know, giving attention to that, it's difficult to help others. So I really thank Camilla for bringing that up. I think that's really important. And hopefully folks are working in a supportive, you know, environment where they are being encouraged, you know, to prioritize their own mental health. And we have another question. Just one second, sorry. This is from Lisa. She just, you know, acknowledged that, you know, caregiver burnout is real. COVID-19 has significantly elevated the stress felt by those who take care of others. So just really speaking to Camilla's statement. But also I think it's important that we bring up caregiver burnout, because caregiver could also mean someone who's taking care of another person. If it's a family member, that can be very stressful. You know, I've seen that in my own family. My grandfather had Alzheimer's, and you know, my parents were his caregivers. And so I really, really encourage someone who may be in that situation to also, you know, try to reach out and talk to someone, and also just take time for yourself when you can.
So now we're going to turn back to a little audience engagement. We're going to throw out a question. You guys can respond on the comments. This is a true or false question. Personality weakness or character flaws can cause mental health problems. Again, personality weaknesses or character flaws cause mental health problems. I want you to answer that, whether it's true or false out there. And last but not least of our panelists, we have the amazing Tevis Simon. Tevis, can you hear us? We can't hear you yet. Can you hear us, Tevis? You off of mute? We can't hear you. You're still on mute. There we go. Hey, how are you doing?
Hi, Tevis.
All right, so Tevis is a peer-to-peer mentor at the state chapter of National Alliance of Mental Illness and owner, we got to give you your plug, of Walk by Faith, a consulting business that provides mental health and substance abuse services. So thank you for being on tonight. This is our first of many, and we're excited to have you. We're going to jump right into your question.
I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. We're going to jump right into your question. Why did you want to use your voice in this area around mental illness?
I think it's important, especially now in our current climate of transparency. I think it's important for those of us that are professionals and human beings. We have a level of transparency. And I do have a diagnosis of a mental health condition. I do live with it. I'm thriving with it. I definitely have challenges through it all, but I think it's important that we have these conversations. So I definitely wanted to be a part of this in hopes to dispel some myths and some stereotypes, and to also share some love.
Yeah, I mean, and when you put a lens of oppression, white supremacy, the conditions that have been normalized, particularly in underserved Black and brown communities. I know we always hear this phrase of, strong Black women, or, the reality of like the lack of compassion for sometimes things that we are forced to deal with like on a regular basis. Kind of unpackage that a little bit. How do you realize that people experiencing depression and mental health challenges like need help with professionals? And again, not just turning to the church, but supposedly being so tough and strong to just deal with conditions that they've seen for generations, be it through their grandmother or through their mother, but they're kind of going through it now and they're supposed to kind of deal with it. How do we kind of break that stigma and force folks that you deal with on a regular basis to actually seek real help?
One thing I've recognized, I'll go with the first question, which was, how did I know that my surroundings and the folks in my environment and just seeing the people day to day needed more than just the resilience, the day-to-day resilience? I was born and raised in Baltimore City, West Baltimore. So I grew up in the 80s.
Throw your neighborhood out. What part?
I'm about to shout it out. So I was raised in the 80s, Reaganomics, Lesserton Terrace, Murphy Homes, CBS, like the whole nine, like Bedford, Orchard Muse.
All right.
You know what I mean? So all of that, and with all of that being said, those of us that are Baltimore born and raised, we know during that time, in that era, especially in that community, it wasn't nice, So I recognized from early on that this thing about, we have to have it under control and we have to have it all together. We were just basically dying slowly. I mean, I remember being a child and my mother told me to be mindful of my surroundings. She taught me how to walk. My walk was different than my counterpart. I didn't walk the same. I couldn't just walk with my eyes straight and not look over my shoulders. That wasn't realistic. So we literally came out of the womb with this defense mechanism. Defense mechanism. And we were already living in fight or flight without knowing it. And translation for fight or flight for my peers is that we were already on go. So for me growing up, I just recognized that what we're doing is we're dying slowly. We self-medicate. We acquire these coping mechanisms that are not healthy. If it's not a vice where we're, doing a drug or doing too much of something, it's our way of thinking. It's that way of thinking that has caught us in this trap of thinking that we don't need anyone. It's this way of thinking culturally that has told us that what goes on in this house stays in this house. And I'm just going to let this just simmer for a minute, because even through the chat and then these 6 squares, we know that we've heard that. What goes on in this house stays in this house. And unfortunately, what that has done is transcended from the house into the communities. So what has now gone on Monroe Street in one house is now a whole West Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And what goes on in one house on Greenmount Avenue is the whole down the hill. So we have to be mindful, of that whole thing there. So, just recognizing that the need is greater than this mental resilience of talking to our peers. We have to step outside of that circle and that bubble that we've created and really reach out and connect with our resources. Because what I've recognized personally through life, being that little girl from the projects and not being project-ish because my mother wasn't having it, is that it's not the lack of resources, it's the lack of resourcefulness. So I've just learned that we really have to do more than just be resilient. Resilience comes along with something else, and it comes along with education. It comes along with healing, and it comes along also with recognizing that we are not our aunties, we are not our moms. Living in the neighborhood with the systematic oppression, we've seen our aunties, our moms. My mother passed away from a heroin overdose. So every day I live, I recognize that I am not her, right? But growing up, all I saw was all of these addictions. We had all these whispers of what mental health looked like and what mental illness looks like. So everyone in my generation, in our generation, who wants to have the conversation? Who wants to admit that they have a diagnosis? Even though we know that something may not be right. We don't want to be like our aunties or uncles because that's what we were told. That's what we saw. There was never a healthy conversation about mental health.
And despite, even if you can't point to something like substance abuse or other issues that are generally known to be mental health issues, the normalization of just regular stress and the way that that's compounded on our lives in a way affects us, right? So we have to literally, who cares if whether it's bubbled up to the surface yet, but just take a step back out of what we're standing in, our normal lives, okay? And not necessarily normalize the level of stress that we're going under, on a regular basis. I think it's really important. I think the one thing that you really add to the discussion is like, how do we interact and talk to folks around us to truly break down that stigma? What has been effective for you when you're communicating to your family, friends, and folks that you're consulting with in the community that helps to break down the stigma of really going after and doing proactive, preventative type of maintenance on mental health illness?
Okay, I'll give it to you in two parts because I believe in duality, right? So not only am I someone with lived experience, I'm also a professional. So, and this is a challenge and this is in real time. So I want you all to know this. I'm being completely honest. So with my family, it's different. It definitely depends on the family members. Let's just keep it all the way honest, okay? Because what I recognize
this whole time, we're straight shooting, like we're
pow.
Yeah, we're giving them exactly what they need. So I want you to provide to folks out there. Let them know like the difference between this type of family member versus that one. So give us the whole thing.
Yeah. Got you. So with family, what I recognize is that in general, not just with mental health or any illness or health condition, is that folks can't receive you until they deal with themselves. Just gonna let folks marinate on that.
Hey, say that one more time.
So a lot of people can't.
Say that one more time.
Folks can't deal with you until they deal with themselves.
Wow.
So here I come, Tevis, right? And I am coming to you as a member of your family, lovingly sharing with you that I have a mental health condition. And there are times where if you don't hear from me, I need you to check up on me. And your response to me is, I got stuff to do. I'm busy. Okay. Next family member. Right? Because what happens with mental health and those of us that are diagnosed with a mental illness, we already feel like we're a burden to ourselves. Mentally, we are compounded with cycles every day that we are working through. See, self-awareness is key in general. Just in general, self-awareness is key. So when you have a mental health condition, you are even more in alignment with yourself or working towards that, I should say. So for me, I already feel like I get on folk nerves or I bother them or I'm too much for them because the way I was raised, right? Depression, anxiety, all those things you're supposed to pray away. So if you're coming at me with all of that, you're coming at me with too much. You got too much going on. That's your problem.
Wow.
So again, coming to certain family members, it's not received because they haven't been able to receive the love and support that they've always needed. So how are they able to give it to me? I'm talking to somebody. Because somebody I know is looking for someone to support them, be it a family member or a friend. And I'm just here to tell you that they will probably never be able to until they're able to deal with themselves. So that's what I've learned on the family front. I have a few family members that love me down and they stay with me and they pray with me. And I know that I can always call on them. But I also have some family members that purposely and intentionally make themselves unavailable because they're not comfortable with mental health. They're not comfortable with mental illness.
And that doesn't stop their love for you, correct? That doesn't. At
all. Listen, I know they love themselves some Tevis. Mm-hmm. I know that, right? But I also know that where they are and where I am is not at the same place. And we also have to respect and understand that sometimes we want people to help us in our healing, but that can only hinder us in our healing. So on a professional level, when it comes to my colleagues, what I say to them professionally is this. If you don't hear from me, call me. Just bottom line. And on a professional right, exactly. Like, because you already know that when it comes to work, I'm on my game. So if you have not heard from me, if you see that I'm not myself, if you notice I'm not posting, if you see I haven't texted you, this is not my, I want attention. That's another myth and stereotype about mental illness. Folks that got a diagnosis is looking for attention. Honey, ain't nobody sitting to check for you or your attention. Okay, that's not what this is about. Okay, this is about a level of empathy that we all need to have more of.
Wow. So Tevis, how has the pandemic, because you've been open and honest with us, and I truly, truly appreciate you bringing your story, your testimony, and your journey here. How has the pandemic affected your mental illness and the condition that you have?
Oh man, it has been a challenge. It has been a challenge. It's been rewarding in a sense because I found out a lot about myself. I mean, what else have I had time to do? I mean, I've journaled. I've pretty much written 3 books. I don't know when they've been published. I've changed my eating habits, so that's helped my mental health. I've gone down about 3 sizes in a good way. I'm watching my I'm watching my grandson. Yes, ladies, come on, somebody. I'm watching my grandson grow. He says grandma now, so I'm enjoying that. That's the highlight of everything, you know, being able to see my family, see my grandson and watch him grow and all that. The sad part of that is that I'm an empty nester, right? So my daughter has her own family and here's mom like, hey guys, you know, like what y'all doing? You know what I mean? Because mommy just binge watching the Wayans brothers like it's 1995 again. So, I mean, you know, that's kind of like what that is. But there are times that there have been some dark times. There have been some times where I was definitely on the cliff, you know, and I had to make a phone call. You know, I personally, I want to say it was the 21st of December. I personally had to call the National Suicide Hotline. And it was for 2 reasons. One, and this is sad, and this is not to make anyone feel bad because we all have our things and sometimes we can't talk. We just really can't be there for someone because we need to be there for ourselves. And I totally respect that. I receive that and I promote that. I'm the president of that club, actually. If you can't support someone because you need to be there for yourself, please do that. But I called the National Suicide Hotline for 2 reasons. One of those reasons was because I was at a place where I felt like my presence here on this earth was more of a hindrance than a help. Folks need to know about mental illness, that when you have an illness, your environment is triggering to it, and it can worsen it. And when I watch the news and I see how many murders we have in the city, when I see our young people that don't know the difference in firecrackers and gunshots, it makes things worse. Your environment can make it worse. And things have been very rough. I'll say everyone doesn't want to stay home. Everyone isn't trying to stay in their homes. Some people don't have the healthiest environment. So I was just at a place where I felt like I just could not get it right. I just couldn't break the wall down. And I felt like maybe, just maybe. So I made the phone call. Because there was no one else for me to call. And truth be told, I don't really think no one would answer the phone. That's the saddest part. I don't think anyone would have answered the phone, not because people hate me or they dislike me, but because they're too busy. That's the part right there, because everyone's too busy. So we got all these commercials and all this stuff that we promote about how we should be more loving and be more empathetic. But let me ask you this question. If your phone rang at 5 a.m., what's the chances of you answering it? Please. I mean, do you really pay attention when your friend who usually checks up on you hasn't checked up on you? Do you call them? The person that's always there for you, loving you when you're not the most lovable, do you check up on them? So, yeah, that's how I was feeling that day. Really used and abused and stretched out on both ends. You know what the word says, hard pressed on both sides. And I wasn't really feeling it. So I made the phone call, and funny thing is, I made the young lady on the National Suicide Hotline laugh. I mean, what is better than that? I mean, come on, you know? And it was funny because when she said to me, she was like, well, you know, I can give you your information and your resources. I told her, I said, listen, I said, I am a mental health professional. I said, and I honestly needed someone to talk to. I said, I'm not feeling well, and I just needed someone to talk to. She said, oh, wow. She said, well, I understand. I said, thank you. You know, and she did her spill, what she needs to do. She was great at what she does. I literally did. I said, if anyone's listening, she was great. But, you know, I did what I needed to do. And later on, I had an appointment with my therapist. We did a telehealth appointment. And I told her about, you know, that phone call that I made. And of course, you know, we had the questions, you know, do you feel like harming yourself, which is what, you know, the traditional questions and everything. And everything, you know, went well from there. But this has been very, very, very hard. Very, very hard. When you have nowhere to go and everything is pretty much closed down, you know, I mean, you can only jog for so many miles. So.
Well, we truly, I truly appreciate you coming on today and providing your story. I think the one thing that we have to get very comfortable with is providing our own stories, because who knows who's listening and what they're going through, or who they're connected to that's going through something. You know, a lot of times we like to look at things through data and quantitative, but a lot of times things are just qualitative in a way that just that information can be passed on to someone that you had no idea that you affected their lives or impacted their lives. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for, you know, kind of providing your story. Earlier, we had a poll question that we sent out because we're trying to do this engagement thing. And it was about, is it true or false? A personality weakness and character flaw causes mental health problems. And we all know that's absolutely false. Everybody out there should have gotten that right. Hopefully we had 100% on that. Mental health problems have nothing to do with being lazy or lack of willpower to snap out of it. Biology, life experiences, and family history are among the factors that contribute to how we are and what's going on for my mental health. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brittany. Any questions, concerns, or shout outs that you see out there on the web?
Yeah, so we got a couple really good questions. I just want to first thank Reverend Yerby-Hammack and Tevis for sharing your stories. You know, I feel so grateful to have been able to meet both of you. And I know that tonight you were able to help someone just by sharing your stories. So I just want to thank both of you for doing that. We have gotten a couple questions. Let me go to the first one. So this question is from Cindy, and I'm so glad you asked this question, Cindy. So Cindy asked, what things can I do to support my mental health?
So we're just going to throw that out to everybody.
Just to anyone.
Somebody already mentioned, but I think it's important to think about activity, think about lifestyle, think about eating habits, think about exercise. Those are all things that if you can change what your body is doing, that can have a positive effect on your mind. Now, way back in the day, I used to be a marathon runner until I destroyed my feet. I ran 25 marathons and 2 ultra marathons. I can't run anymore, but you know what? I got a rowing machine. I got an elliptical trainer in my house. I do something every day. And to start my day off that way really affects my mental attitude. But if you don't have machines and you don't, take a walk. I mean, there's always something that you can do. And certainly reaching out to others, connecting with other people can really be an important support.
I know.
Can I jump in and just give us I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Tevis.
No, I just wanted to just jump in and say to the person that has the question, what I recognize is that I had to go back to basics and find out exactly what I like again, like the things that I enjoy. So I enjoy cooking. I love to cook. So literally looking up new recipes. Being in this quarantine, like I said, I know I kind of exaggerated a bit about the books that I've written, but I journal a lot. So I would just encourage you to be, to meet yourself where you are. I'm going to first say to you to not be hard on yourself, because I could just feel that you're probably thinking to yourself that you're not doing enough. but meet yourself where you are. So if all you can do is get up in the morning and wash your face and brush your teeth, that is an accomplishment. So what I would encourage you to do is the next step is wash your face, brush your teeth, get a pen or pencil and get a journal and begin to journal. And then I would encourage you to wash your face, brush your teeth, get your journal, get your pen, write down something, and then turn on some music. Whatever you can do to get you feeling back to you, whatever that feeling is that made you feel good about you in a positive way, you want to get back to that. So go back to the basics of what makes you feel good. And if you can't figure it out, you can always give me a call. I can connect you to some resources and some good folk, because we got some good folk on this line. So
beautiful. And Reverend Hammack?
Yes, and in addition to what Tevis has said, also gratitude. I know my therapist taught me, well, even though I knew about gratitude, but to be intentional, to find something to be thankful for. At the end of the day, maybe to just write a list, and something as simple as the bathroom. And actually she told me, you know, you can be thankful for the toilet, be thankful for the chairs, just simple things. Don't try to be deep about it. Just look around, because there's always something to be thankful for. And also in this time of COVID, where we are just bombarded with all of the deaths and the sorrows, and even with the political climate and all of those things, turn the TV off sometime if you have to. Don't just binge watch on the news. And even in Baltimore, you know, with the murders and the crime, sometimes you just have to turn it down a little bit and take a woosah moment. You know, meditate, affirmations. If you're a person of faith, if you read the Bible, scriptures, prayer, all of those things will help you as well.
Well, I think this was an exciting talk. I think that we probably should continue to do this more. I know that, you know, as we continue to go down this path of the pandemic and all of the residual fallout that's going to come to our loved ones, our communities, our city, we need to continue to have this more. We last week announced a legislative work group to directly look at, you know, how can Baltimore be better suited to provide that preventative care and that proactive service for our folks. But then also looking at it from a state policy as well as national policy perspective, you know, what can we do to protect our citizens as much as possible? I thank each and every one of you for accepting the call and kind of being a part of that legislative work group. I've heard that the first session went really, really well. I couldn't stay the entire time, but I got a lot of emails and text messages about the productivity of that. And again, I thank you all for kind of participating in it. This is something that I take serious. Near and dear to my heart, you know, as I instructed to everybody on the call last week, was this is something that is not just for show. This is not something that we're just doing for a campaign or for a newspaper hit. This is something that we really want to provide real services the best possible way and think of transformative solutions for our residents, because we know that this COVID-19 is just been deadly, will continue to be deadly, and we need to get in front of it. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank to each and every one of you from subject matter expertise perspective. Brittany, do you have something to say? I think you
I do. I want to encourage everyone to, in the link in the chat, we're going to share a link to a mental health awareness video that our excellent photographer, Xavier Plater, created. And please share this video with, you know, anyone. It has great resources in it. I feel like a lot of people are going to be able to relate to it. So I'm really excited for everyone to be able to view it. I just also want to thank each and every one of you for joining. You know, I'm so grateful that I get to work with you in the legislative work group. And then you were gracious enough to agree to, you know, participate tonight. So thank you so, so much. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for that, Brittany. So again, like Brittany said, hold on. We're going to stop talking, but we really want everybody to go and turn to the link that we're going to provide you in the comment section. Trust me, this is going to be a good 3 or 4 minutes that you're going to think was worthwhile when you see this amazing work.
So good.
From a kid right from West Baltimore that poured his heart into developing So again, closing out, thank you so much for participating tonight. This is going to be one of many. Facebook family, we absolutely love you. Baltimore, we absolutely love you. Thank you to Reverend Yerby-Hammack. Thank you to Mr. Wiggins. And thank you to Sister Girl Tevis for sharing her amazing story. And we're here for you. We're going to continue to be here for you. But we're just so happy and thankful. So have we put the link in the pop-up yet, Brittany?
Yep, it's in there.
The link is in there. So do not do anything else. When you stop hearing my voice, I want you to go to the comment section and press on that link. Goodbye, Baltimore.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.